a lot of the time men are unconscious that they're in this cycle. Like they're
Yes,
not
most of
even
the time.
aware that they're trying to, they probably have a self-image of I'm a really good guy. I'm a really
Mhm.
nice guy. I'm really good towards my
100%.
husband. I do all the right things.
Yep,
And so they've
100%.
convinced themselves and they're really working hard to convince others that they're the perfect husband.
Right.
And they don't realize that they're actually being a manipulative jerk.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the way I put it to guys is really you're treating your wife like a prostitute.
Dr. Mike Frazier, welcome to Maniphesto's YouTube channel. This is a conversation on masculinity, and you are a relationship and marriage uh, coach, counselor, therapist. What would you call it? Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, the way I say it is I'm a psychiatrist. That's my training. Went
Mm-hmm.
through medical school and residency and all that. And yeah, now just do marriage coaching full time. So help guys in particular have more intimate marriages. So mentally, emotionally, physically, intimate in all those areas.
Yeah, yeah. And it's something that here in Europe, for a lot of guys, there's this idea that, marriage, it's kind of, that's like something that doesn't work anymore and we need to look for something new. And the more that I hear this, then it's like, well, what's this new thing that's going to be replacing marriage? I just, you don't really see that. And then the more I started looking into this, it's like, well, if you look at the oldest stories we have in a human culture, like the Odyssey or something like that, like the guys in those stories, especially the best of the men, they were married. And they loved their wives actually as well, right?
Yeah.
And they also had some of the same struggles in their relationships that I guess we have today as well. So this is an old human institution,
Yeah.
and I was
Yeah.
fascinated to be listening to some of your work around it as well.
Yeah, I think there's a temptation towards that. Like, okay, yeah, especially monogamy, it's kind of like out of fashion, let's say, these days. Like, maybe you can be married but still have sex with other people, have an open marriage. Um, but a guy I follow a lot named David Schnarch, he passed away unfortunately, but one of his main things he said is that marriage is it's effective as a people growing machine is what he called it.
Mm-hmm.
And what it really does in my mind, right, it forces you to grow, right? It makes you grow mentally, emotionally, spiritually, sexually, makes you become a more developed man, a stronger man. um, the other thing too, if you look at it from kind of a society viewpoint, um, a husband and wife that are together raising children, it is just a more steady, foundation for kids to grow up in, to see, a masculine role, a feminine role, to, you know, grow up in that just helps. It provides stability for them.
Yeah. Can we think about that a little bit more? I mean, so have you ever worked with guys who've spent time exploring open relationships, or is that something that's been on your radar at all?
Yeah, when they come to me, typically what's going on is their wife wants to start one or is interested in one, and they are not.
Mm-hmm.
That's typically the side that I see of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what I believe very strongly is that for a marriage to work, right, you want a win-win situation, right? Both
Mm-hmm.
people are winning. So that's when it comes to all these different areas: money, sex, in-laws, parenting, religion, housework, time. Those are kind of like the main conflict points. But in
Mm-hmm.
this one, we're talking about sex specifically, right? So what I encourage them to figure out for themselves is like, okay, you know, if their wife wants an open relationship, but they don't, right? They need to be direct about that, right? And just be like, that's not something I want,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe that relationship isn't going to work at that point. Or maybe you can figure out, okay, like, is there some kind of boundaries or limits we can place around that to where it will still be a win for both of us? One of the guys that I worked with was kind of exploring this, trying to figure that out. And they were kind of like, okay, well, if it's like, make sure it's not in the city, because then, we could potentially bump into somebody. We don't want that to happen. So they kind of like negotiated terms that they
Mm-hmm.
sort of felt like would work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so however you go about it, the goal, what's going to make a marriage work is getting to win-win, and coming back to the idea of like growing a person.
Mm-hmm.
um it takes like a lot of strength is the way I phrase it, right? Mental, emotional strength to actually hear someone's opinion and then express yours and then work together to try to get to something that you both feel good about.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the way you talk about like your wife is going to choose in her life and she's free to make choices. And so your best approach as a man is to make yourself a good choice.
Yes,
And you put strength
exactly.
as a central element in that, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, women, they've always been attracted to strength. That's what I believe, and um, if we look at like from ancient days, the guy was more looked at to like in caveman days, like go hunt, right? They had to be physically strong, right? Go hunt,
Mhm.
bring stuff in, protect the cave, all that kind of thing. Even like 50s, 60s, if you were financially strong, that was pretty much enough. Like you were attractive, you could get a good wife, keep a good wife. But now, that's not enough, right? Like you need to be strong across all these areas because women can get their own job. They can go do whatever. So you
Mhm.
need to be kind of like that complete package as far as
Mhm.
strength goes, to be attractive as a mate.
Yeah. I almost kind of feel like for a lot of guys, like the physical strength training, it's not like you have to have it, but it's a good foundation to train the
Mhm.
other types of strength. It's a place
100%.
that you can use to kind of hone yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does require an amount of discipline to stick to it effectively. Also, anybody that comes into my program, that's one of the things we track. Did you do exercise today? We're
Mhm.
not like, oh, you have to do this program or whatever, but just
Yeah.
if you do physical exercise, uh, tons of research that it's really good for your mental health, really good for your emotional health. So, it's part of what we do,
Yeah.
um, to build strength across all those areas.
Yeah. And you also work very actively with accountability. I've seen that you actually have like active
Yeah.
accountability processes.
Yeah, the way I look at this more than ever, I'm just kind of like rethinking how to make this more clear, like what I do and why. Um, so like I talk about building these strengths, right? But if I said, hey, go build your mental strength right now, you probably wouldn't really know how to do that. Or like, hey, go build your emotional strength. Like,
Mhm.
okay, but how do I do that? Where I've said, hey, go build your physical strength, you'd know, like, yeah, go
Mhm.
run, go do push-ups. So what my program really is, it's like it gives you those exercises, right? And we target them to your specific areas that you are especially weak and kind of need to
Mhm.
build some of those strengths up. And then, yeah, you have to be accountable every day for performing those exercises. And then you get coaching on those exercises each day. Like, okay, yeah, you did that well, or no, you didn't. Like, you need to make these adjustments.
Mhm.
And so, um, yeah, coaching and accountability, that's what really accelerates your results, right? When you
Mhm.
know someone's waiting to see if you did it or not, you just are more likely to do it.
Yeah. I think in the business world, there's this saying something like, that which is reported, like numbers that are reported tend to grow positively, and numbers
Yeah,
that are like reported to other people and held accountable for, and there's consequences, they grow
yeah,
exponentially or something like that as well.
yeah, yeah.
Or it's
What
like
gets
tracking and
measured,
reporting, I think. Yeah.
yeah, what's get measured gets managed is another like little maxim
Yeah.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I want to just go around to this open relationships thing again.
sure.
And now I'm talking to Dr. Mike Frazier. So let me use myself in this as an example, actually.
Hmm.
So I got married very early in my life. I don't think the level of reflection about I think what you said, something like marriage as a human growth potential maximizer or something like that. That awareness wasn't really there necessarily. And so me and my now ex-wife, but my wife at that time, we didn't we weren't able to like kind of break through a level. And what I saw was that when I kind of like there was just this like, complete feeling of stuckness, right? And then when that relationship ended, and then I was able to go out and explore more freely, there was this massive feeling of freedom in my life and openness and kind of like, oh, I can breathe and
Hmm.
almost excitement and passion about life again, where, I'd really been down in, a very dark place for quite some time. Um, and then, fast forward 15 years or something like that, I then came to a position where I started realizing like how a commitment to one woman can help me to grow as a man and as a human being, or actually was, in my case, I can say 100% a necessity for that. And then I realized as well, like, if it wasn't for my ex-wife was married again and had got, more kids with a new husband, I should have just gone back to her, because I'd just been carrying all those things with me from that time as well. Um, so yeah, does that make sense to you? And I know there's a lot of young men who feel that passion and excitement from the opportunities of like being able to engage with lots of women as well. And when I say to them, like, like, hey, it's really good for you in a long-term life trajectory to focus on one woman, then they're like, well, you've had your fun, Paul. So I know, what do you say to that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, there's not necessarily like one journey that's right in that, right? Like, them say, well, yeah, you've had your fun. Um, but the thing is, it's kind of like when, like, you meet like a really rich guy, right? And you're like, and he'll tell you, like, money's not it, man. Like it's really not what brings you the most happiness. But then you're like, oh yeah, it's easy for you to say that because you have all the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they've learned something through that process, and that's what you're trying to express to these guys is like, hey, listen, like I did do that, you're right, but I found that it actually didn't bring me what I was hoping to get. Like, yeah, it was there was some freedom in that, but at the same time, like I didn't develop a deep relationship. I didn't really grow. I didn't really like what I teach is, to for marriage to work, you need trust, communication, and then intimacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That develops a really deep mental and emotional connection. And then your sexual connection, when you add it to a deep mental emotional connection, is really amazing. Like it's much better than just, oh yeah, we did, all these different moves last night, right? Which that's fun, but like to then wake up to someone, you're like, man, like I'm so lucky to be with this person, and like this is my best friend. They know me so deeply, and like the sex that we shared it's an expression of that, right? It's just better,
Mm-hmm.
right? It really is. And that only comes from taking the time and making the effort to build that trust and mental emotional intimacy first. And it's tough to do that with more than one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 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 and yeah. I think that, and what I'm hearing as well, it's like it's a focus on the positive aspects of monogamy, which sometimes aren't well illustrated by the culture, I guess, and so
Yeah.
yeah, or often I think as well, if I look at my own childhood, then part of it was also like this kind of like shaming of anything other than normal monogamy or something like that, and maybe that played in. It was like you have to kind of thing instead of or else,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot of that, and I think too, it is important to understand you do have options, right? So it is a real choice because if so I grew up in a Christian faith
Mm-hmm.
called Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Mormonism.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm kind of just consider myself non-denominational Christian, but like a lot of people that grow up Christian um, have that mindset. It's like it's got to be this or nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think that way you don't, it's not really a choice, right? And so you feel, yeah, very trapped. You feel very confined, you know, versus saying, okay, yeah, I could go out and have a bunch of relationships with a bunch of women. Um, there's sure positives to that. There's variety there. It's kind of exciting to have some variety. But what are the cons? And that's what people kind of forget. Like, oh, there are some cons to that. How about, you don't take the time to build that deep connection. They're having kids is awesome, right? And it's going to be pretty tough if you are running around to like be a good parent to to the kids that you have. Um,
Yeah.
so it works better in a stable environment if you want to have kids.
Yeah.
Um,
I'd also
and
say like it develops you into being a man, and it's very satisfying
yeah,
not being a boy anymore. And this
right.
is something I unfortunately, it took me into my late 30s to realize, like I spent most of my adult life, being being a flow boy,
Yeah,
kind of, which
yeah.
is what that lifestyle really engenders in you, I think. And then
Hmm.
like this thing, so maybe I can use that to go into, you spoke a lot about building a strong sense of yourself,
Hmm.
and part of that's like, building trust, and then going on, and then being a man on a mission as well. Could
Yeah,
you talk a little about those? Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So I like to kind of break up. So self, um, like your sense of self, a lot, three things kind of get confused, I think, in there a lot. One is self-worth, one is self-esteem, and one is self-confidence. So self-worth to me means like really understand you have value outside of what you do, right? Like just as a human being, as a Christian person, I believe as a son of God, right? You just have value inherently. But if you're not Christian, you can hopefully see like if you lined up 100 babies, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, that baby's worth 10 times more than that baby, right? You kind of understand that, um, just because they have value as a human being, right?
Mm.
And so when you can get that sense of worth that's not based on comparison, you're in a good spot because if you do base it on comparison, traps guys tend to fall into money, job, status, power. Um, if you're
Number of
comparing
women you've
it,
bedded as
yeah,
well.
yeah, totally,
Mm.
totally, right?
Yeah.
So if you're comparing it there, you're unsteady. Your sense of self-worth is unsteady because you're always trying to one up somebody. You're always worried someone's above you. And so you just don't really feel that solid in your self-worth, right? You're always trying to, yeah, outdo somebody or you're worried someone's outdoing you.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens in marriage too, right? You come in and if you're in that mindset, which I was for a long time, you try to like one up your wife in a lot of things and like show her you're better. And she isn't very attracted to that, is what I found out over time. But you gotta figure that out, right? You got to work on your self-worth. When you feel solid there, then you can move on to like self-esteem, which to me is just kind of how you talk to yourself. Um, a lot of guys, especially I work with high achieving guys, so guys that are doing well, in their careers and things like that. A lot of times they have pretty negative self-talk, actually. A lot of times they're like, oh man, you failed again. Like, how could you do that? You should be better than you are. Like you should be, here, but you're here. Um, and so with that negative self-talk, your self-esteem actually does drop, right? Because you're talking to yourself kind of in a negative way. Um, and then you kind of rely on other people to build you up, like your wife,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we work on that about, how am I talking to myself? How am I talking to myself kindly? Um, Not that you just kind of let yourself off the hook on everything, but just that you are, you know, seeing the good in yourself, right? And then self-confidence, that's what gets built, right? And the way that gets built is keeping your promises, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're a man of your word, you start feeling better about who you are,
Mm-hmm.
right? That builds self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you do hard things, right? The other part you mentioned, being a man on a mission, to me kind of encompasses all of those, right? Where you're saying, like, look, I I'm a man of value. I have certain gifts and abilities, and I want to use those in service to the people around me, right? That becomes your mission. Um, and yeah, if you're if you've got that mission and you're working towards it, you feel great, right? And you happen to be very attractive you know, uh, to a high quality woman.
Yeah. Yeah, I really, this idea that you describe about how like we constantly need to borrow from our wives and get charged up by her to feel like I'm okay, instead of just
Mm,
becoming the kind of man who does the right thing, who when he says he's going to do something, he actually does it.
right.
And personally, I found like I need help in doing that kind of thing. I need
Mhm.
to
Yeah,
make sure I'm surrounding myself with people who call me out when I don't, right?
right.
And the danger of being with guys, and unfortunately this is, I mean, I can also say it's very clear, like when I was in this kind of like flowy state where you're not with one woman in your life and your friends aren't doing the same thing as well, then there's this kind of like constant flow between one thing to the other, and so there's something about monogamy that centers us around a oneness of being just
Yeah.
one person ourselves, right? At
Hmm.
least gathering ourselves.
Right.
um
Right. Yeah. And you start seeing, right? You start seeing all this stuff like, where, where, and this is the thing that happens too. Again, why it's a growing thing, because you can bounce from girl to girl and they're never going to see the, like all of your insecurities and stuff, right? But when you're with a woman for long enough, you start seeing it, right?
Yeah.
And then she's like, dude, that's not attractive. And what a lot of guys will do then is run, right? They're like, oh yeah, she's lame. I hate her, right? She just, go find somebody else. But again, you'll talk about monogamy. What that does is it says, no, you don't run. Now you need to grow up, right? And you need to get stronger. And you're getting a mirror here that shows you how you are not being an attractive guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard work.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
And it's maybe the most valuable thing that one could do in one's life, right?
That's
Um,
what I
so
think.
so can you talk about the mosquito cycle that you've
Yeah,
described? What's that about?
yeah, for sure. So, what that looks like is you at the top of it, right? You come in and you're trying to do nice things for your wife or your girlfriend or whoever for a girl, right? You're trying to do you're getting her flowers, you're taking her to dinner. When you're married, you're helping out with the kids, you're helping out around the house, right? You're doing all the quote unquote right things, you're checking the boxes.
Mhm.
Um, which everybody on the outside is going to say, "Oh man, like what a great husband," right? And people
Nice
might
guy.
even tell, yeah, people literally might tell you that, "Oh man, like you're such a good husband." Like, my wife's friends would tell me what a great husband I was, right? That kind of thing. And so, but right behind that, right, is you are expecting something back for all that. You're expecting back attention, appreciation, affection, and sex. Right. That's what's happening. So I call it the mosquito cycle because you're trying to suck those things off, right? You're doing nice things, but really, you know, there's strings attached, right? You're trying to suck those things off from her.
Yeah.
Um, and then eventually, at first, it can work, right? At first, you can be doing nice things and she's giving you attention, appreciation, affection, sex back. So like, oh, this is amazing, right? But then she stops because she senses that actually you don't really care that much about her. You're just sort of wanting these things back. So she notices, she stops giving you that. And then you start getting frustrated, right? You're like, come on, like look at everything I'm doing. I'm not getting anything back, right? And then you either explode or escape. So explosion would look like, I can't believe you, how dare you look at everything I'm doing for you. You won't do anything for me. You never appreciate me, just like throwing a tantrum basically at her. Um, or you escape into stuff like pornography. You maybe start chatting with another girl, maybe have an affair, maybe you just escape into something that's quote unquote a little more healthy, like work or whatever, just to kind of like avoid those feelings.
Sport,
Um,
hard workouts.
yeah, totally.
Mhm.
Yep. And so, you know, eventually you kind of feel guilty about that explosion or escape, and then you go back to trying to make it up to her. Okay, yeah, I've been working too much. Let me help you more. Oh yeah, I went to pornography. Sorry about that. Like I won't do that again. Let me take care of you, right? So you start doing the nice things, but again, you're not getting what you want. You get frustrated, explode or escape. So it just goes like that. Very common cycle for guys to get into.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what you spoke about is like doing the right actions important in a relationship,
Mhm. Yep.
but it needs to be parallel with the right motivation as well, the right thinking.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. What fuels, yeah, the actions matter, but yeah, it's the thoughts, the feelings, and the intentions that actually matter, right? That's what's getting communicated is your feelings and your intention state. So, like, give you an example of that. So, when I was in this mosquito cycle, I came home one day and like brought my wife home flowers, right? Oh, here you go, right? Um, and she's like, "Oh, thanks," but she didn't put them in a vase right away. And so immediately when she didn't do that, I was like, she doesn't care. How dare she do, I do this for her. She can't even like take a second to put them in the vase, right? So that exposed immediately that I wasn't doing that because I cared about her. I did it because I wanted her to tell me how great I was, right? Give me a big hug and kiss and go to bed with me that night, right? So versus I could have come home and just been like, hey, like these are for you. I love you, great. She could have left them on the desk. I could have just put them in the vase for her, right? Or I could have just, I said, hey, like I could have asked her, like, oh, hey, you didn't put those in the vase. Are you wanting to? Did you not like those flowers, right? She's like, yeah, actually, I don't really like that kind that much. Thanks for getting them. You know, that, but again, then that builds intimacy versus you just getting mad because she didn't give you what you wanted back.
Yeah. So what I hear saying is like there's warning signs because I guess a lot of the time men are unconscious that they're in this cycle. Like they're
Yes,
not
most of
even
the time,
aware that they're trying to. They probably have a self-image of I'm a really good guy. I'm a really
Mhm.
nice guy. I'm really good towards my
100%.
husband. I do all the right things,
Yep,
and so they've
100%.
convinced themselves, and they're really working hard to convince others that they're the perfect husband.
Right.
And they don't realize that they're actually being a manipulative jerk.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the way I put it to guys is really you're treating your wife like a prostitute. And it's hard to hear, but when you actually see it, that's what's happening, right? You're like, hey, listen, I go to work, I pay the bills, on top of that, I take care of the kids and all this. And so hey, like you owe me sex. And as coming from Christian faith too, if you're like, hey, like I committed to you sexually, I'm not having affairs. So like
Mhm.
you really should be,
Yeah.
having sex with
It's
me
your
kind of thing.
responsibility
Right.
to
Right, right.
Mhm.
And if you feel justified in it, it just happens to be extremely unattractive and is not going to make her want to be intimate with you in any way, mentally,
Why is that
emotionally,
so
or
unattractive
physically.
for women? Can you detail that out for us?
Yeah, well, like, I mean, if you are women don't like to be used, right? Nobody likes to be used. Like if she could, if you were really explicit with this thought process with her, and again, like you said, sometimes guys don't see it very clearly. Um, when you're like, oh shoot, like, yeah, I am thinking you owe me sex and you owe me attention,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like usually it becomes pretty clear why that's unattractive,
Yeah.
right? Like if you
It's
just,
often also coupled with like an emotional reaction on the guy's part, as you said, like this kind of like
Mhm,
childless explosion, which
exactly.
shows like unintegrated
Yeah.
uh emotional reactivity.
Right.
And it's a
Right.
neediness as well. It's like I'm not okay until you do these specific things for me. Therefore,
Yes.
I'm not that stable rock that you can depend on and will be there for you, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna freak out if you don't do what I want. And so, yeah, like yeah, I've put it a lot of different ways. Like a baby is a good one, right? If I don't get what I want, I'm gonna throw a tantrum. I'm gonna be
Mhm.
mad. Yeah, or I'm gonna, try to hurt you by going to pornography or another woman or something like that. Um, uh, like an emotional terrorist is another good one. Like, yeah, like you better do what I want or else, I'm going to, yeah,
Mhm.
freak out. I'm going to be mad at you, all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Or yeah, a prostitute is the other one. So like a baby, a terrorist, and like a guy who's trying to treat you like a prostitute. Yeah, like your wife isn't turned on by any of that.
So if some guys can recognize that this is something that's playing out in their lives, what's the way out of the mosquito cycle?
Yeah. So the way I teach it, it's three steps, right? So step one, you have to recognize and eliminate those negative patterns that you have. And really, it comes back to the way that you're thinking about things, right?
Mhm.
How do I really think about my relationship here? How am I feeling towards myself, towards my wife, towards God, if you believe in God? Um, so, getting that, finding the negative stuff there, right?
Yeah.
And then we need to replace those with positive, attractive ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. Okay. And then we need to, step three, just repeat those until that's the new habit. So, like your brain, um, sometimes I give the example, it's like the Grand Canyon, right? So, like if your wife says no to sex one day, right? Your brain has a way of thinking, feeling, and acting around that has run hundreds, thousands of times in your brain, right? So it's really ingrained. So it's almost like like a Grand Canyon, right? Like the waters run through, it's really carved in there. So
Mhm.
when we create a new one, usually right away people are like, oh yeah, that sounds really good, right? But then their wife says no to sex and they instinctively turn back to the old pattern. There's nothing wrong with them. That's just the way it works, right? Because
Mhm.
that habit, that thinking pattern's there, right? It's
Mhm.
ingrained. So what we need to do when we create the new one is also repeat that, rehearse that, right? So that we now ingrain the new pattern so that when she does say, hey, I'm not in the mood tonight, like you are prepared and ready to respond in a way that is attractive with a thinking, feeling, and action that is attractive. um, yeah, that's what we do. And in our program, that's what we do. We have guys send in their thinking patterns, we help change them, we help address them, we have them practice them, and practice the skills of emotional management and communication and all those things that make them
Mhm.
strong, attractive guys and effective in relationships.
Yeah. So there's one thing where I think you took this demand of you need the right thinking even further, and it was certainly what I've been most challenged by listening to your work as well. And this is because maybe I'm probably an arrogant person who thinks a little bit too highly of himself in general, and so I have a tendency to look down on other people around me. And
Hmm.
and I don't know if my wife is going to listen to this, but yes, I even look down at my wife. I think of
Sure.
myself as more capable, stronger, more able to carry a heavy load. and
Hmm.
and so this can sometimes lead to me, this kind of idea, and you almost said it exactly this way, oh, you poor little mumpkin kind of thing, and I'll do this for you because I'm stronger than you.
Yeah.
And what you said is like this kind of like almost reduces all of your efforts to nothing, because you're pridefully looking down on your wife as an incapable as well,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Yeah. And she might buy into that. So like
yeah.
in my personal marriage and story, right? So, my wife came from a lot of really serious abuse, within her family. And so she already kind of had that story believing in her head, right? I'm garbage, right? Like, people can
Mm-hmm.
do what they want to me. And so when I come in, as a guy who is, pretty intelligent, can kind of, you know, relatively kind of forceful with things, it was a match in a way, right? Because I kind of needed to be looked up at and she kind of needed to be looked down on, right? Just to feel comfortable. So it can work for a while, right? But if you want an intimate marriage, right, where, you know, she's looking forward to connecting with you, where you have mental, emotional, and like great physical intimacy, um, it doesn't work, right? That dynamic, yeah, hero and victim. Again, it kind of works, and it can work for a while, right? But it doesn't create a really strong, powerful, you know, um, connection.
Yeah. So what's the program that one engages in then, to, if you talk about like the Grand Canyon,
Yeah.
then where does one, how did you kind of reapproach that with your wife?
Yeah. So we had to go to our own coaching, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, I didn't see a lot of this stuff myself, that I was a big part of the problem, right? The thinking patterns that we're talking about, I didn't really see. I kind of got it, like, and I'm a psychiatrist, right? Like, I learned this stuff. This is what I went through for years and years trying to figure this stuff out. But it still took that outside perspective to say, hey, dude, like, you're doing this. I was like, oh shoot. And yeah, I just saw like, dang, I've been pushing her away with this forever. And like, it felt awful. Like I had to go a couple days by myself and just like let it sink in, like how bad that really was.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I was able to, like we talked about, see the negative patterns, right? Thankfully, I kind of had some of these tools and skills so I could sort of like plug in, um, the new ways of thinking and practice those with her. But even then, like now, the way that I do it myself and we work in the program, it's even more um, specific, right? To where we're doing like very specific, I'm calling them exercises. I think that's a good term for it,
Mhm.
to where we maintain those gains, or we continue to grow in intimacy and connection and strength. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I really love the kind of clarity that you have, that and it's such a clear pathway. If one looks at it can be easy to kind of like say, oh well, it's no, you can't, like with children and biz work, and especially when you're in your like your 30s and 40s, life is just too busy, you can't have all that intimacy.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, it's like, well, it's not easy what you're proposing, but it's like, well, it's really its own reward as well.
Yeah.
And there's maybe one more thing that I'd like to just bring in here, which I think you mentioned earlier, because what I heard you saying to someone else is like, when you start implementing these changes and you start acting differently and you start trying to really think about what you're doing differently, then a lot of the time in the beginning, your wife's going to either give you no feedback whatsoever, like be completely neutral about it. So not like be like, oh, wow, my hero, you're changing
Yep.
everything.
Right.
Or she might, and this is probably, I don't know if this is more likely, I think for a lot of women, she might even give you negative feedback, like
Hmm.
reacting very skeptically and giving
Yep.
pushback.
Yep.
Why on earth do women do that?
Yeah, so really it's wise, right? It's smart for them to do it because what has happened, and so depending on where so I kind of work with like three different or like four different types of guys. A guy that it's kind of more my story where like their marriage is okay, but like the physical intimacy isn't there. That's what they're complaining about. But of course, underneath that is all this other stuff. But that's what they're identifying as the problem. Like, yeah, our physical intimacy isn't there. It's not where I want it to be. Um, and then there's a guy who has been unfaithful. There's a guy whose wife has been unfaithful, and then there's a guy who his wife wants separation or divorce and he doesn't, right? So those are kind of the different levels that I work with. So depending on where you are in that spectrum, let's start at like most severe. If your wife said, I want a divorce, right? And now you're like, oh shoot. And then so you come in and you like start changing everything. Here's what you've taught her. What you've taught her is, hey, if you want me to behave, you have to leave, right? Or say you're gonna leave,
Threaten
you
with
know?
leaving, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what you've taught her. So what then is she going to do to try to make you behave? Like leave, right? Or say she's going to leave.
Yeah.
Right? And especially if your whole approach is like, no, let me get you back. I'll do anything to get you back, right? Now, like all of the warning signs are on for her because she's like, okay, well, what if I do come back? Now all your motivation's gone, right? You're not going to continue this
Mhm.
process, right? You're not going to be the kind of guy that I want to be with unless I'm like out the door. So why would I come back, right?
Mhm.
So, you know, there she's going to give you no feedback or negative feedback. Why? Because she wants to know, is this for real? Right? If I come back, is this going to last? And so the best way for her to do that is to not give you any positive feedback, right? Because again, if your motivation is win her back, if she comes back, your motivation's gone. If your motivation is become a good man because that's who I'm going to be regardless, like I'm going to be a good choice whether you choose me or not. Okay, you continue on that path no matter what she's up to, right? And
Mhm.
so that path is much better because you feel strong, you're in control of it, and those are the two biggest things, right? Versus if you're trying to win her back, you start freaking out because you can't control it anyway, and the more you try, the more it pushes her away.
Yeah.
So coming back to your question, why do women do this? It is a test, right? Whether it's conscious or not, it's a test to see if you are serious about these changes, right? And if she's like, yippee, hooray, like you did it, it's actually not very hard for you to maintain those changes. But if she's like, oh, yeah, great, you finally took the trash out. Yeah, it's about time. 40 years, and this is the first time you do it. So what she's looking for is then for you to say, oh, screw it, right? It's not worth it. You don't appreciate anything I do, and then stop. And then she's going to be like, okay, exactly what I thought, man. Like,
Mhm.
we're done, right? Versus if she's like, yeah, 40 years, and you're like, hey, you know what? You're right. It has been 40 years. You got every reason to not think I'm going to follow through, right? But I'm going to take the trash out now, and I'm going to keep taking it out, right? Whether you notice it or not.
Yeah.
Then she's like, whoa, what just happened? Like, who's that guy? Right. And that's what starts building some attraction back. Right.
Yeah.
But even if it doesn't, you win either way, right? Because you're becoming a better man and a better
Yeah.
choice. And that's the whole paradox in this thing, right? The more you try to get her back, the more it drives her away. The more you try to just be the man you want to be, the more it brings her back.
Yeah. Yeah, this is exactly we have often guys who come into we have like a community just for men and
Yep.
that are working to actually support each other. And we often have guys coming in saying like, oh yeah, I really need to find a girlfriend, or like I need some help, but like what about dating and da 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 da. And the thing we always just say to them is like, if you have trouble with women, then sort out your relationships with other guys, and especially find other male friends that will hold you to account, that will raise the standard, that will have expectations of you, because this is something that men can do really well with each other, right? Women
Mhm.
don't want to have to do that work with a man. Like, it's really tedious for a woman to have to like lift a guy, right? She wants to
Yep.
see that he has male friends that do that for him, right?
Yep.
And then she can just enjoy his company. So she wants to be with a man who is strong. And yes,
Right.
like, I have plenty of weaknesses, but I really, more and more, I just keep on realizing how much, like, my wife doesn't want to know about my weaknesses. She wants to see my strength. And so I talk to my male friends about my weaknesses, or I have someone who I'm working with. Like, I imagine you're also helping a lot of guys with that as well.
Yep.
So what's a strong man? Like, that's where we started this conversation as well, with strength, right? So
Yeah.
what is it? Would you say? Can you go a little bit more in detail on that?
Yeah, sure. So the way I look at it is across those areas, right? Like spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, sexual. So spiritual strength to me, it really has to do with those three things, right? Do I have a good sense of my own self-worth? Um, is my self-esteem solid? Am I a man of my word? And am I, a man on a mission, right? So you got that, you have good spiritual strength. By the way, if you just have that, like you're in really good shape because, according to John Gottman, he says the number one trait women look for is trustworthiness, right?
Yeah,
And that first one, it builds trust,
yeah,
right? And to me, that's one of the three pillars of passionate marriage: trust, communication, intimacy. So that's one. So that's spiritual strength. Mental strength to me means, okay, do you have a clear system for looking at the way you're thinking and adjusting it to make it more effective, right?
mhm,
Can you do that? Right. So we teach a very clear system to do that in my program. Emotional strength. Okay. Can I manage my emotions appropriately? Am I intelligent enough to know my own emotions? Right. And then when you can, a lot of times that helps you be better at recognizing them in other people as well. So that's emotional strength. You're not losing your temper. You're not stuffing your emotions and then like exploding later, all that kind of thing.
mhm,
Um, so that's spiritual strength. Physical strength, pretty clear. I talk about physical and financial strength kind of grouped in there. And then sexual strength is, you know, Christian folks sometimes will like totally try to separate out their sexuality. Like it's bad, except sometimes when I'm thinking about my wife, then it's okay, versus saying like my sexuality is part of who I am, and this is how I want to direct it, right? And kind of using um, what I call a sexuality statement. Like for me, I want to use my sexuality to connect and have fun with my wife, right? And so I just judge stuff off that. Does that help me do this or not? Will pornography help me get there or not? Probably not, right? Will going to a strip club help me get there or not? Probably not, right?
mhm,
So, it just helps direct my sexuality in that way. Um, and then staying true to that, right? So to me, that's sexual strength.
mhm,
So anyway, that's a strong man, right? If you can do all those things, you're in good shape. And that will attract a good woman to you. Now, once she is attracted to you because you're strong like that, you do need some skills. You need to be able to communicate and be able to generate physical intimacy in a way that's fun and has flirting and passion with it.
mhm. Yeah, great. Yeah, there's two things there that I I think just need to be underlined, and I think that the trustworthiness, and it's hard. I think I can look at my own life and just see how, for long periods of time, living in a big city, being in a certain circle of friends, and then I just noticed, like, oh, every kind of 1 to 3 4 years or something like that, I'd be like shifting out my circle of friends. Like, things would be different. I'd be looking at the world differently. There'd be like a new kind of set of values that I'd be living from, and it was just creating like a bit of a shifty character. And I think a lot of people are living this life these days in big cities. Like, and I think if people are honest with each other, like, or honest with ourselves, like, we can see this in ourselves, right? And so the importance of being a man who stands on a platform of, like, saying, like, no, I want to be a man of my word.
Mhm.
Like, that's something that's not easy to do, right, today.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't think it's ever been easy, but I think it's harder than ever now.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. And then it's really interesting, like, the sexuality piece as well, that's like, it's such a core part of like the human struggle
Yeah, yeah,
for all men. And I really think it's great that you're just so forward and open about that. And like, yeah, that sexual intimacy, it's an integral part of what makes a marriage work. And I think
yeah,
it gets so down prioritized so much.
yeah. Well, I mean, to me, you can like that's what if you're going to be monogamous, that is what makes marriage special, right? Like you're choosing to say, this is just for you. This connection is just between us. Um, and again, like ideally, at least the way I teach to my kids and the way that I think is useful to think about it, right, is like when you have sex with someone, what you're saying is like, I want to be connected with you completely, right? Like I want to share all of me with you. I want you to share all of me. Like, I want to raise children with you, right? Like to me, that's what you're saying when you have sex with somebody. And yeah, if you can build that trust and mental emotional intimacy before, it makes the sexual intimacy even more powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, Dr. Mike, thank you so much for your input here. It's been very valuable, I think, and a great detail, I think, for that a lot of guys, I think, are can get a lot of value out of. So really appreciate it. Where can people find you if they're interested in looking more into your work and following your what you're working with?
Yeah, great. So yeah, appreciate that. So I have a podcast, Strong Men, Strong Marriages.
Mm.
It's on all the podcast platforms. I have a YouTube channel that also says Strong Men, Strong Marriages across the top. I think if you search Strong Men, Strong Marriages YouTube, it'll come up.
Mm.
Um, and then my website, strongmenstrongmarriages.com.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that explains kind of the different options for programs if that is something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And I have a book that'll come out sometime, hopefully this year.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah. And I saw you offering individual. I really like the individual coaching sections that you're offering as well, where you take this seriously. It seems like it's really an opportunity for guys to do this properly. It's not like a quick little fix that you're doing, but you
No,
seem
no.
to know like this takes focus and investment on behalf of a man.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's again, I like the strength building analogy because like you kind of understand, hey, if I want to build a strong body, it's not going to be like a one time deal or like even like a once a week deal like therapy. Like it needs to be daily work to build physical strength.
Mhm.
Same thing with all these other strengths. It needs to be daily work. So that's what I offer now in my programs is that daily work because more and more like I'm proving to myself and like with my clients successes that's what does it. Doing the daily work just transforms things really fast.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Dr. Mike. And
My pleasure.
yeah, I'll make sure I put the link down in the description as well.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.